All right, guys, so 2.2, we are solving more quadratic equations using square roots, but this time we are going to be solving equations that have binomials that are getting squared, which just means you're going to have a parenthesis with an x on the inside, and the square is going to be on the outside, instead of having the square connected directly to the x. So, similar to what we've done with a few little extra steps, because x is not just getting squared. X is getting added or subtracted to another number and then getting squared. So what I need you to know about this square root method that we used last time and that we're using today is that there's certain times that we want to use it and there's other times that we don't. Okay, so if you just look right here, recommended when to use this type of solution is when you have an x squared, or you have an x inside a parenthesis that's getting squared. When you don't want to use this method, I mean, you can try, but it's not going to work if you try it this other way, is when you have an x squared and a regular x in the same problem. Notice that neither one of these have both. This one has an x with the square on the outside. This one has an x squared, but neither one of them have an x squared and an x. So we're going to use the square root method similar to what we did last time, okay? And just a note that I need you to remember is that when we are solving equations and we use a square root on both sides, we get two answers. We get a positive answer and a negative answer. So we are usually, not all the time, but a lot of the time we end up with two different solutions to the equation, all right? So let's take a look at what this looks like. So we are making the equations a little bit more complicated today. So your first example over here on the right has a little bit more going on. We don't just have an x squared. I've got x plus 3 on the inside of the parenthesis with a 2 on the outside, a square on the parenthesis, and then on top of that, I've got a minus 1. So I've got a lot of stuff going on. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to just follow the steps that we've learned when we're solving equations. We're going to do railroad tracks, and we are going to slowly get x by itself. All right. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we're going to add, and it doesn't show this on the example. I'll show this step by step below. But if you want to add this to the example, the first thing it does is it adds 1 to both sides, and that makes the right side 50, and that makes this go away. And then it divides both sides by 2. To get rid of this 2 that's in front of the parentheses. So it takes 50 and divides it by 2. And that's how they end up with x plus 3 squared equals 25. That's where that came from, is from that 50 divided by 2 and the x plus 3 squared being left over. Now, we got all the extra stuff on the outside gone. The next step is to square root both sides, because I can't get rid of that plus 3 that's inside with x until I get rid of everything on the outside. And I'm stuck with this square on the outside. So what it has us do is it has us square root both sides to get rid of that square. And when you do that, that gets rid of the square on the left. And when you square root 25, remember you get two answers. You get a positive and a negative 5. So what it looks like, and it's kind of hard to see on this example, is you have x plus 3 on one side of the equal side. And on the other side, you have two different numbers. You have a 5, and you also have a negative 5. And I will usually put a line right here to kind of separate the two of those. Because I've got two different numbers now that I've got to deal with. So when I minus 3 over here on the left, for my next step, I have to minus 3 from the 5 to get 2. But I also have to minus 3 from the negative 5 to get negative 8. and those become my two answers, okay? So I know that was a quick, holy cow example. Let's go through a couple step by step, showing you how to solve these from start to finish, all right? So first example, x minus 6 squared minus 43. So when I do my railroad tracks, I want to get rid of that minus 43. What I really want to get to is I want to get to x by itself, but x is stuck inside with a minus 6. It's got a square on the outside. So I can't touch this inside stuff until the square is gone. But I can't touch the square until the minus 43 is gone. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 43 to this side, and then I'm going to add 43 to this side. So I end up with x minus 6 squared being equal to 38 plus 43 is what? 81. Now, my next step is to get rid of that square. I can't touch the minus 6 because it's inside the parentheses. So I'm going to square root this side, and I'm going to square root this side. And what that does on the left is it gets rid of the square, and all I'm left with is x minus 6 equals. Now, when I square root 81 on the right, I get 9. When I type that in my calculator, I get the answer 9. But I need to remember that there's a second answer that my calculator doesn't tell me, and that's negative 9. So it's kind of like the right-hand side now has two different equations that I'm working with. And it's not really a big deal because I'm just going to do what I always do. My next step would be to add 6 over here. So when I add 6, I'm going to add it here, but I'm also going to add it here, so that I end up with x equals 9 plus 6 is 15. That's one of my answers. My other answer is negative 9 plus 6, which is negative 3. So I can go ahead and say x equals 15 and negative 3. Those are my two different answers. And this is a little bit different than last time because last time our answers were the same number, just one of them was positive, one of them's negative. But now, after I get the positive and the negative numbers, I'm having to add or subtract or do other math to them. All right, so let's look at number 2. I know this is still new. It's still scary. That's why we've got lots of examples. Don't worry, we're going to go through 6 of these. So answer number 2, I've got an x squared on the inside. I've got an x plus 10 on the inside of a parenthesis being squared. On the outside, I've got a minus 37 and a 2 that's getting multiplied. So I've got to work backwards to get x by itself. So the first thing I need to do, I can't touch anything on the inside, or this exponent, or this multiplication until I get rid of that minus 37. So I'm going to add 37 to the left, and then I'm going to add 37 to the right. So I'm left with 2 parenthesis x plus 10 squared equals, on the right-hand side, 13 plus 37 is 50. Okay. Now my next step, I still can't touch the plus 10 or the square because I've got this multiply out in front where I'm multiplying by 2. So I've got to divide both sides by 2. So I'm left with x plus 10 squared equals 25. Now I can almost work on the inside of the parentheses, but I've got to get rid of the square first. So the opposite of square is square root. So I square root the left, I square root the right. On the left-hand side, I'm left with x plus 10. On the right-hand side, if I put square root 25 in my calculator, I get 5. But there's another answer, negative 5, that I have to remember to use. So my last step is to get x alone. So I've got a minus 10 on the left to make it go away. And when I minus 10 on the right, I've got to minus it from both of these numbers separately. So I end up with x equals 5 minus 10 is negative 5. Negative 5 minus 10 is negative 15. So those are my two answers to example number 2. All right, let's jump over to example number 3. We're just going to keep going. I know it's a little bit new, a little bit crazy, and you'll be just fine. We just got to practice a few. So this one looks a lot like the one I just did. I've got a x plus 1 that is stuck inside parentheses. So I've got to get rid of the square root, or the square, but I can't get rid of the square because there's a multiply and a plus on the outside. So I'm going to work my way backwards. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit right here for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is minus 2 minus 2. And that's going to give me 3 times x plus 1 squared on the left. And on the right, I'm left with 300. Now I've got to get rid of this 3. So I divide by 3, I divide by 3, and I end up with x plus 1 squared equals 100. Now I can finally get rid of that square by square rooting, since that's the opposite of square. So I end up with x plus 1 equals 10, but it also equals negative 10. Be really careful not to forget about that negative answer. And then my last step is to minus 1 on the left to make that go away. But on the right, I need to minus 1 from both of my answers. So x equals 9 and negative 11. Those are going to be my two answers. So I can write down x equals 9, comma, negative 11. If you don't like using the comma, you can say and. Or you can write x equals 9, x equals negative 11. That works as well. Same thing. Let's go over to number 4. Let's go over here to the right. This one's a little bit easier because there's nothing going on the outside. But I can't touch that minus 6 until I get rid of the square. So when I do my railroad tracks, the first thing I'm going to get rid of is that square. And I need to square root in order to do so. So square root of the left gets rid of the square. Square root on the right, the square root of 12 is not a nice number. If you type that in the calculator, you're going to get 2 square root 3 as an answer. I'm okay with that answer. That's a great answer, except you need to remember that there's also a negative 2 square root 3 as well. You don't just get one number, you get a positive and negative of the same number. Now this one's a little bit weird because I'm going to add 6 on the left to get rid of that minus 6. And I'm going to add 6 on the right to both of these numbers. But when I try to do that, when you try to type that in your calculator, it's either going to give you an ugly decimal, which is a great answer. You can use that ugly decimal, or the reason it's doing that is because these two numbers don't add together very nicely. So if you don't want to write the ugly decimal, you can just say x equals 2 root 3 plus 6 and negative 2 root 3 plus 6. Those are your two answers. So you can say x equals 2 root 3 plus 6, comma, negative, whoops, I forgot the 2. Negative 2 root 3 plus 6. So you don't have to actually add those numbers together. You could, and I'll still give you credit for it, but you don't have to in case they're ugly numbers, okay? All right, let's try number 5. I'm assuming we're going to get some weird stuff going on. I've got x squareds on the left and the right. I don't like that. So when I do my railroad tracks, let's not do it in black. Let's do it in blue. When I do my railroad tracks, the first thing I want to do is get the x's on the same side. So I'm going to minus 2x squared from both sides because those are like terms, so I can move them together. So 3x squared minus 2x squared is just regular x squared. And on this side, I've got negative 49. Okay? Now, step 2 would be to square root the left and to square root the right. And when you do that, your calculator is going to get mad at you. It's going to give you an error. And it's giving you an error because of this number underneath the square root. There is nothing wrong with square rooting 49. That's great. You get 7 and you get negative 7. But when you try to square root a negative number, it's impossible. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. And the reason you can't, if you remember what it means to square root something, is you are looking for two numbers that will multiply to equal negative 49. So I'm looking for number 1, number 2, that are going to multiply to equal a negative number, negative 49. The problem is these two numbers have to be the same number. So they either have to be 7 and 7 or negative 7 times negative 7. But that doesn't work because 7 times 7 is positive 49. It's not negative 49. Negative 7 times negative 7 is also positive 49, not negative 49. So it doesn't matter what I do, I cannot square root a negative 49 because there's no answer for that question. So when your calculator says syntax error, it means there is no possible number. So what you would say for this one, instead of x equals an answer, you would say that there is no, there are no real solutions. And it's important that you say that phrase, no real solutions, because there are imaginary solutions that we're not worrying about that anytime soon, but there are no real solutions. So that's what you would say. All right, number 6. I think we're going to get something similar because I can see a negative number already. If I minus 36 and move it over here, I end up with 4 parenthesis x plus 1 squared equals negative 36. My next step would be to divide by 4. I'm so far so good, right? X plus 1 squared equals negative 9. Now I have a problem because when I square root this side and square root this side, I'm trying to take the square root of a negative number and I'm going to get a syntax error on my calculator. It gets mad for a good reason. You can't square root a negative number. So my answer to number 6 is there are no real solutions. My answer is that there's not an answer. And we'll worry about the what and the why a little bit later. For now, that's a great answer. If you try to square root a negative number, it's impossible. So just write down that there's no real solution. Okay. All right. On the back side, this homework's a little bit different. The instructions say to pick 5 problems from each column. So on the left, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 problems. Just pick 5 of them, not all 7. On the right, I think you've got more than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't care which ones you do. Just pick 5. Solve those 5. Be careful of your answers. Okay. And then there's 2 problems at the bottom that are a little bit more story problem driven. Those you need to do. These are not optional. You need to do both of those problems at the bottom. Good luck. Come see me if you need help.